Approximately 3,200 years ago, one of the most momentous events in human history took place. Multiple major civilizations during the Bronze Age collapsed within a generation. International trade ground to a halt, and almost every major city around the Mediterranean was destroyed, and much of the world entered a dark age. Despite its significance, this event is one of the least known and least understood periods of human history. Learn more about the late Bronze Age collapse and its possible causes on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. This episode is sponsored by MasterClass. If you're listening to this podcast, then you are someone who is curious about the world and loves to learn. And if you want to give the gift of learning and knowledge this Christmas, you can't do better than MasterClass. MasterClass offers online classes from some of the most successful instructors in the world in their fields. You can learn cooking from Gordon Ramsay, conservation from Dr. Jane Goodall, disruptive entrepreneurship from Sir Richard Branson, mathematical thinking from Fields Medal winner Terence Tao, and diplomacy from former Secretaries of State Madeleine Albright and Condoleezza Rice. You can access over 200 classes across 11 different categories. MasterClass always has great offers during the holidays, sometimes up to as much as 50% off. Head over to masterclass.com/everywhere for the current offer. That's up to 50% off at masterclass.com/everywhere. Once again, that's masterclass.com/everywhere. This episode is sponsored by Quince. Finding the perfect gift can be pretty overwhelming. This year, I found the perfect spot for timeless gifts made from premium materials. So you got to check out Quince. Quince lets you treat your loved ones and yourself to true quality at an affordable price. I got a cotton fisherman throw blanket from Quince, and I literally use it when I am writing many of the episodes for this podcast. I also have some Turkish cotton bath towels from Quince that I absolutely love. By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, Quince passes the savings on to you. Quince is also on the nice list. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. Gift luxury this holiday season without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/daily for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/daily to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/daily. The late Bronze Age collapse is a topic that I have had on my list of possible episodes almost since I started this podcast. If you look at the broad sweep of history, the late Bronze Age collapse is one of the most important events in the course of human civilization. And despite it being so important, it's something that few people are even aware of. And if it's such an important historical event, then why have I waited so long to do an episode on it? It primarily concerns the fact that there's a lot about it that we just don't know. If you remember back to my episode on the three-age system, the Bronze Age corresponds to roughly 3300 to 1200 BC. This period corresponds to many of the events in the Old Testament, just to give you an idea of how far back we're talking. Moreover, the events that I'll be discussing in this episode took place in the Eastern Mediterranean. This area is an arc that primarily includes modern-day Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, and Egypt. So, what was this world in the late Bronze Age like? Around the year 1200, there were several well-established empires and kingdoms in the Eastern Mediterranean. In what is modern-day Greece was the Mycenaean civilization. The Mycenaean civilization, which flourished in primarily mainland Greece, was a powerful, palace-centered culture known for its military prowess, monumental architecture, linear B script, and influence on later Greek mythology and culture. In eastern Turkey and northern Syria was the Hittite Empire. The Hittite Empire was a powerful Bronze Age civilization renowned for its advanced legal system, use of chariots in warfare, extensive trade networks, and rivalry with Egypt and other Near Eastern powers. Cyprus was sort of part of the Hittite Empire, but only loosely so. It was more of a vassal state, but there were several invasions. South of the Hittite Empire, where modern-day Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine were, was traditionally known as Canaan. However, by 1200 BC, they had been under the rule of Egypt for several centuries. Egypt was in the middle of the period known as the New Kingdom. This was the period in ancient history that most people are familiar with, and it included many of its most famous leaders, including Akhenaten, Ramses II, and Hatshepsut, as well as many of its most famous structures that were built during this time, such as Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel. I should also at least mention the Babylonian Empire that existed in Mesopotamia, in what is modern-day Iraq, as well as the remnants of the Assyrian Empire, which was sandwiched between Babylon and the Hittites. They were not directly affected by the events of this period, but they did feel the aftershocks. Much of what we know of this period in this region comes from archaeology, such as the Uluburun shipwreck, which was discovered off the coast of southern Turkey near the town of Kos in 1982. The Uluburun shipwreck showed that there was an enormous amount of trade in the region during this period. The ship was approximately 15 meters or 50 feet long. What they found were ingots of copper, tin, and glass, ivory and elephant tusks, gold and silver jewelry, as well as exotic items such as ostrich eggshells, hippopotamus teeth, and amber beads. There were also bronze weapons, spices, olive oil, pomegranates, pottery, ceramics, and most probably scrolls and documents, as some seals were found. This is consistent with other evidence that shows that there was a significant amount of trade between the various cities and empires along the eastern Mediterranean. So, around the year 1200, things were pretty stable around the eastern Mediterranean. Each of the major empires had been around for several centuries, there was active trade in the region, and early writing systems were being developed. There were tensions between the Hittites and the Egyptians, but nothing was really widespread. So things were about as good as they could be for the Bronze Age. And then something happened. Within the span of a single human lifetime, everything fell apart. Major powers, including the Mycenaeans, Hittites, and the New Kingdom of Egypt, experienced significant decline or completely collapsed. Trade networks that had linked the region's kingdoms disintegrated, disrupting access to essential resources like tin and copper for bronze production. Writing systems were completely abandoned in many areas, signaling a loss of administrative and cultural continuity. Major cities such as Mycenae, Knossos, the Hittite capital of Hattusa, and Ugarit were completely destroyed. And those were just the largest cities. Many, many more were also devastated. The total number of deaths during this period is unknown because we have so few records, which is why we have so little information about what happened. Estimates vary widely, but it could be hundreds of thousands to several million people, and this was during an era that didn't have high populations. The fact that these civilizations all collapsed or declined at approximately the same time really isn't in question. The big debate amongst historians and archaeologists is why. This period was centuries before classical Greece or Rome, which we're pretty familiar with. Writing was primitive at this time and known only by an elite few. So when things started falling apart, nobody was writing down what was happening for posterity. For the rest of the episode, I'll be discussing theories that have been proposed to explain the collapse. And these theories are not mutually exclusive. A combination of causes could have overlapped, magnified each other, and hastened the downfall. The most popular current theory is that the region succumbed to invasion from outside forces known as the Sea Peoples. Who were the Sea Peoples? We don't know exactly. There are a few records from this period that speak of invasions from outsiders. Several come from hieroglyphics in Egypt, and another is from a cuneiform tablet found in the ruins of the city of Ugarit. Many different names were given to these sea people. Some of them are Pelset, Sherdin, Shekelesh, Denyen, Luca, and Ekwish. Some of these names aren't associated with any known groups, but historians have tenuously associated them with various Mediterranean places. Others, such as Luca, are associated with islands off the southwest coast of Turkey. So the most popular belief is that the Sea Peoples weren't a singular group, but were rather a confederation of different peoples. They could have come from further west in the Mediterranean, from islands such as Sicily or Sardinia, or another theory holds that they may have been displaced people from Mycenae. The attacks appear to have been systematic, with the Sea Peoples starting with the Mycenaean Empire and then attacking the Hittite Empire and then finally moving south to Egypt. Their attacks seem to be amphibious, attacking from the sea, which is where the name is derived. The easiest analogy to make to the Sea Peoples would be the Vikings. They were raiders who came in by sea and ravaged the towns that they attacked. The Sea Peoples seem to have done something similar. The Sea Peoples theory was developed in the mid-19th century by Egyptologists Emmanuel de Rogue and Gaston Maspero, who were able to decipher hieroglyphics in Egypt. While the Sea Peoples hypothesis has become the most widely accepted, it is not universally supported, and some researchers have come to question it, or at least the idea that they were the primary reason for the collapse. The Sea Peoples are not the only theory for the Bronze Age collapse. Even if you accept the Sea Peoples hypothesis, the next question would naturally be, why did they attack? And why were they able to defeat these powerful empires so easily? Another theory is that a severe and prolonged drought contributed to the Bronze Age collapse. This theory is supported by archaeological evidence and climate studies. Around 1200 BC, regions across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East experienced significant environmental stress. Tree ring data, sediment cores, and pollen analysis indicate a period of reduced rainfall and lower agricultural productivity. This drought would have led to widespread crop failures, creating food shortages and destabilizing societies that were reliant on surplus production to sustain their populations and complex political systems. It isn't known if this weakened the societies that the Sea Peoples attacked, thus making it easier for them to conquer, or if drought and famine were what forced the Sea People to migrate to try to find a new home in the first place. Regardless, all of these civilizations were highly dependent on agriculture, and any disruption would have affected the stability of the governments, military, and trade. Yet another theory was developed by historian Robert Drews in his influential work The End of the Bronze Age. He proposed that the Bronze Age collapse around the year 1200 BC was driven primarily by a revolutionary shift in warfare, which disrupted the dominance of chariot-based armies that had underpinned Bronze Age governments. According to Drews, the rise of heavily armed, mobile infantry undermined the effectiveness of chariot warfare, which had been the backbone of military strategy for centuries. Chariots, though highly effective on flat, open terrain, were expensive to maintain and required specialized infrastructure, such as trained horses, skilled warriors, and craftsmen to build and repair them. These vehicles were also symbols of elite control, often used by aristocratic warriors to dominate battlefields and enforce the state's authority. However, Drews argues that a new style of warfare emerged, characterized by infantry equipped with bronze or perhaps early iron weapons, large shields, and better armor, allowing them to engage chariots directly and neutralize their advantage. This shift likely occurred due to advancements in weaponry, including longer swords and more effective spears, which allowed infantry to counter chariots' mobility and reach. Additionally, the decentralization of warfare allowed non-elite groups, possibly including the Sea Peoples, to challenge the established powers by overwhelming them with flexible infantry tactics. As chariot armies became increasingly vulnerable, the military and political systems that relied on them collapsed, contributing to the fall of major civilizations like the Mycenaeans and the Hittites. One final theory that may have contributed to the collapse is earthquakes. Archaeological evidence points to destruction in cities consistent with earthquakes. One or more earthquakes during this period may have devastated major cities, which would have weakened the empires in the region. Regardless of which combination of these theories is correct, the Mycenaean and Hittite civilizations collapsed, and the Egyptians eventually stopped the invaders under Ramses III. While Egypt didn't fall, they were severely weakened. The golden age of Egypt was now in the past. Likewise, though not directly affected, the Babylonian Empire in Mesopotamia and what was left of the Assyrian Empire also declined. And there were also effects as far away as the Caucasus, North Africa, and northern Iran. Much of this had to do with the collapse of trade routes. The bronze, which was core to the Bronze Age, required tin, which came primarily from Afghanistan and to a lesser extent from Britain. The result was a centuries-long dark age in many regions, during which the centralized states were replaced by smaller, less complex societies, and cultural and economic recovery was slow. Systems of writing like linear B script used by the Mycenaeans totally vanished. This collapse reshaped the ancient world and set the stage for the emergence of new Iron Age civilizations. One theory is that the use of iron came about not because it was a better metal than bronze, but rather because nobody could easily make bronze anymore because the supply of tin had dried up. The collapse of the Bronze Age was a bigger shock to the world than the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, which took much longer to play out. It took several centuries, but out of this Bronze Age Dark Ages came the classical civilizations of the Iron Age that we're more familiar with: Greece, Rome, Phoenicia, Carthage, and the Persian empires. The collapse of the Late Bronze Age is simultaneously one of the most important events in human history and also one of the least understood. It reshaped the ancient world, eventually leading to the rise of new civilizations and the eventual dominance of Iron Age cultures. The period remains a subject of fascination due to its complex web of causes and its enduring impact on the trajectory of human history. The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Benji Long and Cameron Kieffer. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports the show over on Patreon, including the show's producers. Your support helps me put out a show every single day. And also, Patreon is currently the only place where Everything Everywhere Daily merchandise is available to the top tier of supporters. If you'd like to talk to other listeners of the show and members of the Completionist Club, you can join the Everything Everywhere Daily Facebook group or Discord server. Links to everything are in the show notes.